Ladies and gentlemen, you welcome to this edition of the 6 p.m. primetime newscast on Equinox Television, live from our headquarters in Cameroon's economic capital, Douala. I am BrigadeAntiSardinard. In our top stories in this edition of the news, the World Health Organization warns that Africa could become the new coronavirus epicenter. The past weeks have seen a sharp rise in the number of coronavirus cases on the African continent. And back in the Republic of Cameroon, the government has extended its anti-COVID-19 measures and other accompanying measures that have been taken by the administrative authorities to prevent the spread of the COVID-19, as the figures of confirmed cases, deaths, and also those treated continue rising. The President of the Republic of Cameroon has ordered that schools should resume 1st of June 2020. Schools have remained shut down in the Republic of Cameroon since the outbreak of the coronavirus. This is one of the three measures taken by the President of the Republic and announced by Prime Minister Chief Dr. Joseph Jangote yesterday. In the meantime, the government has extended its first 13 anti-COVID-19 measures or restrictions by 15 more days. The government is stepping up the fight against COVID-19 as the figures continue rising. For me, I'm Strong Sander.
Directly related to the fight against the coronavirus pandemic in Cameroon, President Paul Biya took 3 strategic decisions Thursday, April 17, 2020. Among the 3 measures taken by the President of the Republic of Cameroon is the resumption of classes from nursery to universities across the country beginning June the 1st, 2020.
It is understood that this measure is subject to change depending on the evolution of the pandemic.
Schools have remained closed in Cameroon since the 18th of March 2020 as one of the measures to curb the spread of COVID-19. President Paul Biya also extended the implementation of the measures against COVID-19.
The renewal for an additional 15 days of the 13 restrictive measures published on 17th March 2020 as part of the fight against the spread of the COVID-19 in our country, to which were added the additional measures communicated on the 9th of April 2020.
The measures, which included, among others, the closure of Cameroon's land, sea and air borders, the closure of all drinking sports, restaurants and leisure sports across Cameroon, the ban on overloading in all transport sectors in Cameroon, and the call for the population to strictly respect the preventive measures recommended by the World Health Organization. The compulsory wearing of face masks in public places and other measures were taken by the governments of Cameroon. President Paul Biya also called for the finalization of a process to evaluate the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the Cameroonian economy and the fast determination of the urgent measures to accompany most vulnerable economic sectors in Cameroon and households within the coronavirus period.
The committee's findings to date give us reason to be optimistic about our ability to contain this pandemic.
The special COVID-19 response measures announced for 15 days by the governments of Cameroon have been renewed twice.
Speaking in the nation's political capital, Yaoundé, yesterday, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Cameroon, Chief Dr. Joseph Jangote, explained government's action and the present situation of Cameroon as far as the COVID-19 and, of course, government's fight against the pandemic is concerned. Take a listen.
Firstly, it appears the number of patients testing positive to COVID-19 continues to increase. Statistics provided by the Ministry of Public Health show that 996 people have been infected against 731 on the 9th of April. However, 164 people have recovered from COVID-19, while 22 deaths from this virus have been reported. As a result, the mortality rate of COVID-19 remains low in our country compared to the total number of patients testing positive and to the situation in other countries. Secondly, it was noted that the population largely adheres to the measures prescribed by the head of state to limit the spread of COVID-19 in Cameroon. The measure concerning the compulsory wearing of protective masks in areas open to the public is welcomed and applied by a very large majority of our compatriots. Moreover, the masks do not mean that we must stop compliance with social distancing measures. I would like to observe that markets are still a major area of concern. I therefore call for a sense of civic mindedness and responsibility for better protection in our markets. Thirdly, the government has taken full measure of the difficulties faced by certain key sectors of our economy as a result of the global health crisis caused by COVID-19 pandemic. I'm thinking in particular of the transport, hospitality and catering sectors. It goes without saying that the restrictions will be gradually lifted as the pandemic is brought under control nationally and internationally. Fourthly, the government notes with satisfaction the mobilization of national and international stakeholders in the fight against COVID-19 in our country. There is every reason to believe that actions being carried out in various fields to limit the spread of this virus in our country are already producing encouraging results and deserve to be intensified on the ground until this pandemic is eradicated.
Cameroon's Minister of Public Health, Dr. Manauda Malachi, was explaining government's anti-COVID-19 strategy to members of parliament yesterday at the Hemicircle in the nation's political capital, Yaoundé, and he said that by tomorrow 100 ventilators will be available, and he also indicated that command has been placed for 700,000 test kits to reinforce the government's response plan worth 56 billion francs CFA. Innocent reports.
Dr. Manauda Malachi, Public Health Minister, spent at least 3 hours facing the Member of Parliament at the National Assembly briefing on the coronavirus situation.
As people representatives were a bit worried with some measures that they will have to ask the minister to clarify on certain things, like the testing that people are complaining they are not able to get tested. Some people are complaining that they are paying for those tests. Some people are complaining that there should be total lockdown. Some people are complaining there are Cameroonians out of this country that need to return back because they are being confined in foreign countries. And what are we doing about that? So we had to ask the minister all these questions so they can assure Cameroonians.
Questioned on the government's new approach of not communicating regularly, new contagious, recoveries and death cases, Dr. Manauda Malachi explains that the daily issuing of statistics was to revive the people's consciousness of the reality of this pandemic.
Beaucoup ne croyaient pas. Et donc, il fallait leur donner les chiffres au jour le jour pour qu'ils se rendent compte.
Explanations which some of the people's representatives deemed satisfactory and imperative.
And we are very, very satisfied because he answered point by point and gave us all what they have been doing. As we are closing in 2 days' time, when we go back to our various constituencies, we'll be able to update our militants, our people, our constituents on the measures that the government has been taking and the ones that they are still to take.
Nous sommes un peu satisfaits de sa communication parce qu'il a édifié.
The UDC hails the explanations, but regrets that the government imposes prescriptions on citizens without accompanying them in terms of improving their welfare or livelihood in order to better enable them adhere to the measures.
Sans accompagner ces prescriptions des mesures d'accompagnement.
UDC also criticizes government's approach concerning Cameroonians blocked in other countries.
On continue à faire croire aux gens qu'on est soucieux des Camerounais qui sont à l'extérieur.
That many Cameroonians have been abandoned in West Africa, with nothing being done to ensure their repatriation.
Et donc, ils ne bénéficient presque pas d'encadrement.
Nous ne pouvons pas vaincre le Covid-19 au Cameroun.
The SDF thinks in this unity, the COVID-19 pandemic can never be conquered. Political games in the fight will not help because the virus does not friend any political party.
Le Covid-19 est une pandémie qui attaque tout le monde.
Dr. Manauda Malachi, however, says main focus is to contain the coronavirus. He assures before Monday, at least 100 respirators will be procured.
We have a minimum of equipment, and until Saturday we will receive about 100 respirators. I think it's the beginning of something to heighten our plan of riposte.
And the test kits, how many?
Yes, we have around 20,000 kits today.
Focus is now on the about 700,000 test kits commanded as announced by the Minister of Public Health. Cameroonians are also expecting detailed explanation on the government's response plan against the COVID-19, fixed at the sum of 56 billion francs CFA, as announced by Dr. Manauda Malachi, Cameroon's Public Health Minister.
The President of the Republic of Cameroon, Paul Biya, discussed the fight against COVID-19 in Cameroon, France and the world yesterday at the Unity Palace with the French ambassador to Cameroon. Details with Immaculate Fogwe.
Presidency of the Republic of Cameroon. Presidential guards wearing face mask. Masked French ambassador to Cameroon arrives. He is received by the head of state without his face mask, now obligatory in all public places and institutions in Cameroon as part of measures to stop the spread of COVID-19. The fight against the coronavirus in Cameroon, France and the world is on the discussion table. I met with President Paul Biya and we had a very long discussion. I thanked him on behalf of the French Republic for all the efforts put in place by his government to help facilitate the return of French citizens who had been blocked from traveling to their country following the closure of Cameroon's borders. They also discussed the 230 billion francs CFA G20 debt relief, including 60 billion rescheduled by France. Concerning the Anglophone crisis, French Ambassador Christophe Guillou reminded President Paul Biya the necessity for a global ceasefire called for by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
And as the fight against COVID-19 in the Republic of Cameroon takes a step upward, administrative authorities are now implementing repressive measures, notably against those violating government's anti-COVID-19 measures, but also the sanitation rules of the World Health Organization. Several persons have been arrested in Lum in the Mongo Division littoral region of the country for failing to wear the face mask and for violating other anti-COVID-19 measures of the Cameroon government. Immaculate Fogwe once more has the details.
They have been arrested for violating government anti-COVID-19 measures. These inhabitants of Lum in the Mongo Division of the littoral region of Cameroon are in the police dragnet for two crimes: the non-wearing of face mask and overloading. The divisional officer and the mayor of Lum are tracking down defaulters of the measures taken by the Prime Minister head of government, Chief Joseph Jangute. We have arrested some persons who are not respecting the measures taken by the government of Cameroon. The action will continue this way until we are convinced that the coronavirus has been eradicated in the country. If we are not informed by hierarchy that the virus has been eradicated, then we will continue going to the field. Some of the inhabitants complain that they are unable to afford for the required face mask. However, local administrative authorities say the grace period is over and that defaulters will be punished. When we go to the field trying to enforce order, It is not to suppress the population, but rather sensitize them on the fact that the measures taken by the Prime Minister is for our own good. As the saying goes, prevention is the only effective way of fighting against the pandemic that has killed a great number of persons across the globe.
Elsewhere on the African continent, the World Health Organization warns that Africa could be the next coronavirus epicenter. United Nations officials also say it is likely that the pandemic will kill at least 300,000 people in Africa and push nearly 30 million people into poverty. The past weeks in Africa have seen a sharp rise in coronavirus cases, and there have been almost 1,000 deaths and almost 19,000 infected persons across the African continent. So far, the rate is much lower than in parts of Europe and the United States of America. The World Health Organization says that the virus appears to be spreading away from African capitals. The president of Burkina Faso, Roch Marc Christian Kabore, has offered 6 months of his salary for the fight against COVID-19. The report of Thursday's cabinet meeting says in the same vein, Prime Minister Christophe Joseph Marie Dabiri has also decided to sacrifice 4 months of his salary for the same purpose. Ministers of State and other ministers in Burkina Faso will offer 2 months and 1 month of their salaries respectively to boost the country's anti-COVID-19 fight. As of 15 April 2020, Burkina Faso counts 546 positive COVID-19 cases, including 212 women and 334 men. 257 persons have been treated and 32 have died in the country. Talking Point is up next. And we are going to South Africa to meet our guest in Johannesburg. Dr. Patrick Ngasa is a public health professional and he is in Johannesburg, South Africa. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the 6 p.m. primetime newscast on Equinox Television, and we're going to be talking about the fight against the COVID-19. You are a Cameroonian public health professional based in Johannesburg, South Africa. What is the situation in Johannesburg?
At the moment, the situation is, we can say, contained. I'm sure you are aware that for a few weeks now, the entire country is in lockdown, meaning people are invited and requested to stay home, and very few people are allowed to go out. These are people from what they call special services, like your health professionals and such. So the situation is a bit contained. We are not seeing the number of cases that we expected at this stage of the epidemic. So yeah, but obviously there are the social implications of a lockdown, especially in African countries, and we are seeing it in South Africa and Johannesburg, with some populations struggling to survive in these lockdown circumstances.
Dr. Patrick Ngasa, in South Africa, there are many Cameroonians. What can we say about these Cameroonians who are also suffering the impact of the lockdown and the impact of the COVID-19 in that country?
Regarding the Cameroonian community in South Africa, obviously they will be as affected as the South Africans themselves are affected. So basically, I will assume that a number of Cameroonians will be living out of businesses and stuff like that. If the business is closed, definitely that will have impacted on the economics, on their pockets, just to put it bluntly. meaning they're struggling as the rest of the country. So regarding the ones that I'm aware of, I think people are just trying to survive in the lockdown condition. I'm not aware of any type of discrimination as the ones we observe in countries like China. But yeah, it's basically the same condition as South Africans. Those who are in business are affected. Those who have more formal work are just either working from home or are on leave and receive their salaries. Therefore, they wouldn't be as affected economically speaking. But yeah, in globally, what I can say is that the Cameroonians are surviving, and then there is not really nothing distinguishing the Cameroonian situation from those of South Africans. Distinguishing.
South Africa is one of the badly affected African countries as far as the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned. Is the lockdown and other measures being taken or that have already been taken by the South African government bringing down the figures? Are they helping to reduce the spread of the virus within the country?
Indeed, South Africa is, I think, one of the country the most affected. To date, we have about 2,600 cases, positive cases, and the first case was registered early March. So normally, what we were expecting, I must say, there should have been more cases compared to when the lockdown was implemented. So what was really to praise about the South African authorities is that the president, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, he really took leadership with his minister, the Minister of Health, and they really responded as a team and as a really compact team involving all stakeholders and experts and civil society and so forth. Therefore, the response in South Africa has been informed by sciences and what really the experts have been advising. So since the lockdown has been implemented, we can really see already that the number of infection, the number of daily infection is kind of what they call, they say, plateauing, meaning it's kind of stable. We were expecting to be at a phase where we will be having community transmission with some sort of an exponential number of cases per day. But since the lockdown has been put in place at around the 26th of March, that's not the picture has completely changed, whereby the number of infections per day has really been reduced, and therefore it's kind of the epidemic is kind of stable at the moment. However, we are not out of the danger zone, and there's suspicion that maybe the peak might just be delayed.
How well are the positive COVID-19 cases managed in South Africa in terms of tests, treatment, isolation?
African countries. South Africa is quite developed, but what you see in the South African health system is that you have a very strong private health system, whereby the people who have access to medical aid can have really world-class type of medical care. However, you have a public health system that is quite struggling, is really going strongly. They have, to date, there are about 90,000 people that were tested. You need to understand that initially, as in Cameroon, the first cases were people who were traveling abroad. Therefore, there are probably people from a certain level of economic situation. So those people who have had access to private health care, and mostly they were taken care of in private hospitals. And now that we are seeing more and more people in the community being affected, that's when the public hospital, public facilities are being involved. And the government is really doing their best to have these very specific centers where they can be taken care of. The other people with mild diseases are just requested to be isolated at home. The isolation obviously is a challenge because for the people who don't have a certain level of who don't have money, to be put it safely, having to isolate in the home, if it's a two-bedroom house or if it's a small home, it becomes a challenge. Therefore, for those kind of people, government has put in place isolation centers where in case you cannot be isolated safely in your house, you will be taken out and put in an isolation center and looking after by the government. So really what we can say is that because of the mobilization from government, bringing together the private sectors and all other stakeholders, they are really doing their best to really fight the COVID-19 epidemic as best as they can.
The figures of COVID-19 confirmed cases, deaths are stabilizing in South Africa, but in Cameroon the figures are still rising. And to extend the first 13 anti-COVID-19 measures by 15 more days, and there are other measures that have been taken by administrative authorities in Cameroon to fight the COVID-19, but the figures are still rising. Where do you think is the problem?
The thing is, obviously, knowing the situation in Cameroon, it's become a bit difficult to really actually trust the number of the figures that are made public. However, we can indeed see that there's an increase. The latest number has almost 1,000 positive cases in Afrique in Cameroon. From what I've observed, obviously I'm not quite involved. I'm not part of any. I cannot speak as for the government. But from my observation, I think more can still be done. Like you can see, for example, when we see the images from the equinox reporting and stuff like that, there are still a lot of people in the street. There are still a lot of people in the market. There are even the port of mask that has been called on to be compulsory since last Monday, I think, is not respected yet. And even when you see people who are using the mask, they are not using it as it should. To be honest, with a situation like COVID-19, what would have been ideal would be a situation of confinement, or what we call here in South Africa lockdown. Unfortunately, because of the socio-economic situation in Cameroon, the government is not wanting to go to that route. Therefore, they are advocating for washing of hands in public and port of mask and stopping economic activity at 6. If you stop selling at 6 to open in the morning, what happened to all the contact that have occurred before 6 p.m.? So they are just, anyway, it's like you are not going full on with the measures. It's halfway. Therefore, there are still people that are in danger. There are still people that are exposed. We also saw the way the people that were supposed to be quarantined were managed. The quarantine measures for those who were coming from France and other countries were not that strict. Some people could have still access to the patients. Those who were supposed to be quarantined could see their family. Some have run away and stuff like that. So there are really a lot of question marks in the way the authorities in Cameroon have been managing the situation. The population seems to be still exposed to the virus. We are grateful that we're not seeing the number of positive cases as in Europe, but the risk is still there. And I think the measures, even though they seem to be comprehensive, to more than 20, they don't seem to really contain the epidemic. That's why we can still see the cases increasing, because obviously we don't know if all those people who were coming from overseas with the virus were quarantined properly, where they were isolated properly. Are there people that the government is missing? How many tests are being done every day? So there are really a lot of question marks. Therefore, it's not a surprise that the number of cases are still increasing.
The Minister of Public Health of Cameroon, Dr. Manauda Malachi, has said that by tomorrow, latest Monday, at least 100 tests will be available, and a command has been placed for more equipments to boost government's anti-COVID-19 fight. Now, the World Health Organization is warning that Africa might become the next epicenter of coronavirus. What do you think about this warning, Dr. Patrick Ngassa?
Obviously, it's very concerning, and all African countries should really take notes and really work closely with authorities like World Health Organization to really up their response. Because what we know is that there is a transmission that is possible with the virus. And from what we can see in Europe and in the US, it can go very fast. But when you look at the African continent, obviously the economic situation, socio-economic situation makes for certain measures not to be implemented. For example, social distancing or things like lockdown or confinement. Therefore, the risk, as I said earlier, the risks remain. But the way we are observing the number increasing, we are not getting to the levels of European countries. Therefore, one has to question himself, are we testing enough? Are we missing cases? Or is it that the virus itself behaves differently in Africa? We know Africa in general, the weather is quite hot. Does it play a role? So there could be other questions that the scientists and researchers could ponder on. However, the risk for Africa to become the next epicenter is real because of the economic and social condition, and we must know that our health systems for most of the African countries are not really up to scratch. We can talk about ventilators, ICU beds, and stuff like that. The African countries seem not to be prepared for an epidemic of the scale of what we can see in New York or elsewhere. Therefore, it's really important that the African country can take heed of what WHO is saying and implementing measures to really prevent as much as they can this epidemic of COVID-19.
Cameroon, for example, is at stage 2 of the transmission of COVID-19, and the World Health Organization is saying that the virus seems to be spreading fast from the African capitals into the hinterlands. What is the risk that the continent as a whole and the countries of the continent are exposed to, are facing with regards to this movement of the virus from the capitals into the hinterlands?
Indeed, as we said, because the confinement measures were not strict, we saw people, for example, I will focus on the case of Cameroon. People came from France or elsewhere and brought the virus, unfortunately, to the country. And some of them have been given, had access to their families. Some of those family members obviously went back to the villages, therefore carrying the virus. If it was a situation of confinement and proper respect of quarantine rules, those situations would have been avoided. Unfortunately, now that the virus is going to other provinces or districts in the country, we know that in those areas, how much access to testing will those people have? Definitely, if there is an insurgence or there is a surge of infection in rural areas, not only the issue of access to testing, but also the simple basic issue of access to care. We know that very few of those localities might have facilities, health facilities to take care of COVID-19 diseases or infection. Does it mean that when people will be positive in the village, they will have to be transported to centers like Douala or Yaoundé for treatment, or would the country have to really in emergency put on health structures in villages? It's really a concerning situation that now the virus is progressing more into rural countries and rural places in the African continent because of those conditions that I just mentioned: lack of health care, not access to testing, not even the proper repartition or distribution of health professionals within the territory. We know that in Cameroon, most of the health professionals are either in Douala or Yaoundé or maybe Bafoussam, but you won't see much in other areas. So those really increase the risk and the challenges that COVID-19 can represent in case it spreads to our localities, our rural localities. Therefore, really, the government and the authorities should do their best to look at that specifically and identify those cases and isolate them as soon as possible to avoid the spread.
Some health professionals like you, Dr. Patrick Ngassa, are proposing that there should be a massive test campaign organized across the country. For example, here in Cameroon, something like that is being done by the Ministry of Public Health here in Cameroon's economic capital already. But the proposal is that the test should be done everywhere, should become obligatory, and those tested positive extracted from the communities and brought to isolated areas where they will be put under medical attention. Do you think this can help in bringing down the COVID-19 curve?
Okay, the testing in itself will not bring down the number of cases. The testing will only tell us how many people are positive, and it's only if they are isolated and treated adequately that we can bring down the number of cases. The problem with this infection of COVID-19, it's really revealing the lack and the dire situation of our health system. If you say you're going to have a massive testing campaign, how much is it going to cost? Does Cameroon has a capacity to do maybe 100 tests per day, 200 tests per day? When you talk about massive campaign, what are the numbers? I think the government should be more open into releasing data for the people to have a more informed opinion. But however, it's the right thing to do, to test as much people as possible, and indeed to put them in adequate condition of isolation. It obviously will have social economic circumstances. If a breadwinner is found positive and taken out of his family, what will happen to his wife? What will happen to his kids? You can see already that the government should have accompaniment measures to accompany that kind of initiative. If you want to test, yes, what is recommended? We need to test to find as much positive cases as possible. But then, when you do the isolation, you cannot leave families by themselves without the breadwinner or a wife without access to her kids and stuff like that. Therefore, do Cameroon have enough capacity to really have isolation infrastructure to take care of all those patients or all those people that might be tested positive? These are questions that really authorities should be answering, and that you guys as journalists should be really putting to the authorities. But a massive campaign is really the right thing to do, because let's remember, if you leave even one single case, positive case within the community, that will be enough to make the disease to spread again and to even go against all the positive gain that would have been received or accomplished by the health authorities. It's important to test, but obviously you cannot also test just blindly to go everywhere and test everybody. They should be starting from a contact point. Is there somebody infected? Who are the people in contact with these infected people, and go like that? Otherwise, if it's to test the whole country, definitely I'm not sure the Cameroon might have capacity to roll out that kind of massive testing campaign.
The President of the Republic has ordered that schools should resume by 1st of June 2020, depending on the figures of the COVID-19 in Cameroon. When you look at all the measures that have been put in place and the present situation of Cameroon, is that feasible?
It's difficult for me really to talk of the feasibility of such a measures. As I said, the question will be, who is advising the president? Where is the president receiving his information? Because it's not just you cannot just give a number. For example, here in South Africa, there is what we call a modeling. A modeling is when you do calculation to see, depending on certain condition, how far will the epidemic be in a certain point of time. I'm not sure if that kind of modeling has been done in the Cameroon. The president might have access to information that obviously us as the common public might not have. But when I see the way cases are still increasing, when I see how the challenges of implementing issues like lockdown or confinement, when I see the not respect of the using masks and even the washing of hands, we know in Cameroon access to water is a challenge, access to electricity is a challenge. So it really makes one uncomfortable to say that from 1st of June, kids can go safely back to school and things can go back to normal. maybe the president is having access to information that obviously us we don't have, and maybe be advised by epidemiologists and experts that have been the reassurance that opening schools on the 1st of June is something safe to do. But unfortunately, me as external person, it's difficult for me to really pronounce on what the president has just said.
What can be done, apart from what has already been done by Cameroon and other African countries, for that to be possible, for children to return to school by 1st of June 2020, and for the virus to be cast out of Africa within the next few weeks, Doctor?
It might not be possible within the next few weeks, because the ideal situation would have been, for example, whether a vaccine is available. Therefore, people would have been vaccinated, and then at a certain stage, the population could be back to vacate to their occupation. But unfortunately, there is no vaccine. Therefore, what we are left to do right now is to prevent in all African countries. Cameroon, unfortunately, is not going the lockdown route and confinement route. It is important to keep emphasizing with education of the population. I think with COVID-19, the message that has been spread all over the world is that we can fight it together. It's not the Minister of Health alone, it's not the President alone, it's everybody together to really fight this. Therefore, it's important to keep it that this reality and it is impacting the continent. That's for one, education. Secondly, the measures that are to either stay away from mass gatherings, to wash hands, and to avoid greeting, contact, social distancing. All those measures should really be implemented by the population.
All right.
I think the government should do more in how to properly use the mask. If possible, while doing the massive screening testing campaign, give out masks to the population, 2 at least be 10. If it's possible, obviously that is a lot of economic implication. However, that's only by implementing or by respecting those kind of measures that eventually the virus will be under control, and Africa will win this fight against COVID-19.
Dr. Patrick Ngasa, public health professional, speaking to us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you for joining us in this edition of the news on Equinox Television.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us. That's it for today.